Okay.
We are live now. We are live now.
Okay. So we have a pretty nice audience at the moment. We have about 14, 15 people who have joined the call in addition to the speakers, and we're sort of going to be waiting for just one more minute before we get started. I'm going to request Pooja to load her presentation on. I'll start with a quick little introduction while Pooja is doing so. Um, and this is really a general introduction to everybody on the call. As probably many of you know, if not all of you, Learn Indian Freshwater Ecosystems is essentially a volunteer group of folks who have come together because we believe that freshwater ecosystems needs more knowledge dissemination. And what we have done is we are pretty diverse. We've folks who are really working on turtles, and my colleague Steve works on fish. I work on otters. We've come together to create this open source platform with live sessions. We started off in the week prior to World Rivers Day, and now we're pretty much having sessions approximately a couple of times a month. One typically would be in English, and one we hope to do in a regional language. Um, these sessions are also on YouTube, on our channel for viewing subsequent to the program. And as we speak, the session is live on YouTube as well. If you do have questions, please use the chat box, as well as if you are on YouTube, you could obviously you could scroll there and post your questions alongside. My name is Gopa Kumar, just to reiterate, and what we have actually done today is put together a team of three very interesting folks who have done some really, really interesting work. So it's my pleasure to introduce Pooja very briefly. She's been working on hornbills since 2015. I mean, far longer than the hornbills themselves remember. So they all see her as a very familiar figure, essentially, in the Western Ghats. Did her MSc from NCBS, is a member of the Hornbill Specialist Group, and is at the moment a project associate at CCMB Hyderabad, that's the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology. So, Pooja, very happy to welcome you on and hope to have you started with the presentation with a quick question, which is, I love the title, and you were the first person who actually told me about hornbills being farmers of the forest. So could you tell us in the course of the presentation a lot more about how this happens, a little bit about hornbills, and then specifically about the relationship between hornbills and the riparian buffer, right? So Pooja, over to you, and you can get started. Can you unmute yourself, Pooja? Sorry. You need to unmute yourself. Yes, we can. Yes, Pooja,
Yes.
it's all yours. Please
Yes.
get started.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And yeah, let's talk about hornbills, and not just hornbills, but hornbills that need rivers and the forests and vegetations around our rivers, along the rivers. So, as the title suggests, today I'll be, take you all to watch what Malabar pied hornbills are doing in the Western Ghats. So before we get into details of Malabar pied hornbills, let's have a look at what all different species of hornbills we have in the Western Ghats. So starting from smaller hornbills to like according to increasing body sizes. First comes Malabar grey hornbill, which is the smallest in India and smallest in the world. Then we have Malabar pied hornbill, and uh, the other species is great hornbill. And fourth species that we have is Indian grey hornbill. So, as I mentioned, Malabar grey hornbill is the smallest in the world, and in this map you can see the distribution, which is restricted only in the Western Ghats. So this is a Western Ghats endemic species. Whereas if we look at the Indian grey hornbill, that it is distributed almost in most of the country, most of the states in our country. Now, when we look at the larger hornbills, such as great hornbill, its distribution in India is in the Western Ghats and in the Himalayas. And Malabar pied hornbill's distribution is little different, where it is found in Western Ghats and in some parts of central India and the Eastern Ghats. So now let's get into what these hornbills are and what their ecology is. So as we all know, they're very large birds. They look majestic. Seeing them in flight over canopy of forest is really spectacular, and they are very long-lived birds. So in their natural habitat, they're known to live more than 15 to 20 years in wild, and they are also slow reproducing. So during their lifespan, they attain sexual maturity at the age of 4, and they produce only one chick every year. So hence they are a slow reproducing species, and they're wide ranging. They are strong flyers. They fly over really large distances. And the most interesting of hornbills is their unique breeding cycle and very interesting parental care that they invest in. So I'll just quickly show you a video about the nesting of hornbills. So here is a nest of Malabar pied hornbill, and they are cavity nesters. So they occupy naturally formed cavities, as one you can see in the video. And the female seals herself. She gets into the cavity and seals herself. So you can see the sealing at the entrance. And this is a male who brings food and feeds the mother and also the growing chick. And this duration spans around 4 months. So in smaller hornbills, the duration is smaller, around 3 months, and in larger hornbills, it ranges more than 110 days. So here you can see the father is feeding the mother and chick. So hornbills have this uh, sac-like structure, gular pouch, where they store the food or fruits, and they regurgitate one by one and feed at the nest. Yes. So hornbills are called as or are known as farmers of the forest, mainly because they play a very important role in our ecosystem. So hornbills' diet is mainly comprised of fruits. More than 90% of their diet uh, is is comprised of multiple different fruits such as figs. Then they figs, myristica. Then they feed on many different species of jamun, uh, and so on. And as they are also strong flyers and they cover larger distances, meanwhile they also disperse seeds of these fruits at very large area, and hence they are called as farmers of the forest. And like many other important wildlife, they are also indicator of the health of the forest. So they are indicator species, they are keystone or flagship species, as we can say. And so Malabar pied hornbills of all these, they live truly on the edge of the river. Their home is these riparian stretches, riparian forests. So let's know more about it. So I just showed few videos, and so I want to stress on what are their key requirements. So what do hornbills need to persist in an area, in a forest or outside protected area? So A is the large trees for nesting, because this is a huge bird and they need a pretty big cavity in a large tree so that female can safely enter the nest, and they can reproduce the chick. Then, because they are frugivores, they need diversity of fruits. They need lots of figs. They need species that are high in energy, species that are high in nutrition, such as lipids or fats. One such species is myristica, which is wild variety or wild relatives of our nutmeg. And the one photo here at the bottom is Strychnos nuxvomica. This is another lowland forest species and also found along the riparian buffers. Hornbills love this. I'm sure many of you, if have visited Dandeli, you would see abundance of these trees and hornbills feeding on this all the time. So this is one of their favorite fruit too. Another thing they require is the tall trees or tall sites, such as you can see here on the left is one huge tree of Tetramelis nudiflora. This photo is from Tilari. So this is such a tall tree, and hornbills need such places to roost. So roosting site is basically a place where all individuals flock together. They stay together, and roosts are particularly important for hornbills because it is thought that roost sites are their communication uh, points where they may exchange some information on where the resources are available. They also find mates at the roosting sites. So the competition for finding the mate, for selecting the mate, happens at a roosting site. So it's like their social gathering. So such sites are very, very important. When such large trees are not available, we have also seen them roosting on bamboo bamboo culms. Like the photo on the right, you can see this is a congregation of about 10 hornbills on on bamboo poles. This is also from Tilari. And another interesting requirement they have is the playgrounds. So they love playing in the mud. So here is a video taken by Ajay, and you can see all these hornbills have you know come down on the ground, and what they're doing is called mud bath, where they just come and enjoy the mud. This is fun to watch. So again, this social interaction is thought to be of some relevance, but we are still not sure what exactly this means. But we also assume that because it is a communal play between all the individuals, this does serve as important site for persistence of hornbills in any particular area. Yeah, so now let's come to the current distribution and status of hornbills, Malabar pied hornbills, especially in the Western Ghats. So as we can see here, this is a map uh, generated from eBird data, and you can see the species ranges from Maharashtra up to Kerala in south. In all these states, we have this species. Hornbills, Malabar pied hornbills are lowland or low elevation forest habitats, and they require moist deciduous kind of forests, and their key habitat is the riparian forest. They also use mangroves. They use swamps such as myristica swamps and any other uh, along the rivers, any patch of good forests. And as here you can see, the darker the point which I have circled in yellow is where the most of or the frequency of seeing these hornbills is much higher. That's why the tri-junction at Maharashtra, Goa, and Karnataka is very important site and stronghold of Malabar pied hornbills in the Western Ghats. And important to note here is I'm just giving one example of Kali River because Anshi Dandeli Tiger Reserve is one of the key site for Malabar pied hornbills. So Kali River flows it flows for about 350 kilometers, and it has 6 major dams. And this is just one of the river where Malabar pied hornbills occur. So their habitats are quite in danger. When we take a closer look at where are these hornbills, so here you can see it's a good lowland moist deciduous forest, but at the center, this maybe photo is not very clear, but this is pineapple plantation. So the entire hill or hillock has been cleared and pineapple has been grown. So hornbills have missed out, or they have lost their important habitats here. Then we have agriculture for sustenance. Then we have this patchy, broken patches of uh, riparian buffers. Again, like it's a key habitat feature for hornbills, but because of a lot of other pressures, now they are into small patches. Or we have monocultures, plantations such as the darker uh, vegetation we see here is a rubber plantation, where it's not a food of hornbill, and and you can see the a very immediate contrast between the natural habitat and the monoculture plantations. So these are the reality scenes of hornbill habitats. So these riparian habitats are changing at an alarming rate. We are losing all these habitats due to forest loss, increased rate of mining, encroachments into the riverbeds, the riparian stretches of forest, and as rivers are the shared resources by wildlife and humans, we have high anthropogenic pressure on these buffers. And of course, monoculture plantations are also cutting down on the diversity of food plants that hornbills have, the large nest sites, potential nest sites that hornbills may have. And just to end my talk here, I would just say that rivers and the forest along the rivers are really key for protecting hornbills in our Western Ghats, and saving riparian ecosystem is the only key for these species. Thank you so much.
That is, thank you very much, Pooja. That is completely fascinating. And the sort of, so what I hear you also say that in addition to saving riparian patches, also wetlands like the Myristica are very, very critical, right?
Yes,
That's
yes.
one of the key points you're making. It's a very nice thread here, because we've done, we've had an earlier presentation on Myristica. We've looked at species that are endemic to Myristica, and now we've added one more to that list, which is the hornbill, right?
Yes,
Um,
and the interesting part I would like to highlight here is hornbills are among the only seed dispersers of Myristica, because hornbills have large beaks, large gapes, and Myristica seeds are really huge. They are the size of at least 2 to 3 inches. So hornbills can only disperse these seeds. So for Myristica, hornbills are important, and for hornbills, Myristica are very important. So it's a very tight interconnection between these two
yeah.
um,
Wow. Wow. So
components of the ecosystem.
very high level of mutualism there. I think that's
Yes.
fantastic. That's fantastic. I also take away from your presentation, certainly as far as Western Ghats is concerned, the impact of monoculture agriculture. You've taken two examples. You've taken pineapples and rubber, but I'm sure you've also taken paddies, for instance. But principally, something like rubber and pineapple can be a real issue for a species like the hornbill, right? Because it just eats up into their endemic territory, as I see it. So that's one key takeaway I'm getting from this as well.
Yes, yes, because I think structurally it differs a lot. The top canopy is gone. We have
Yes.
only shrubs, or even in rubber plantations, though there are tall, they're thin trees, they're not really huge trees, so not very suitable for hornbills to nest in. There's no availability, or there's no other diversity of food plants that hornbills could use that
Fantastic.
patches for.
Yes. Yes. Fantastic.
but
Thank you.
but whereas
Sorry.
Sorry.
I would just make a point about the coconut plantations or areca nut plantations. They are at least providing a good structure, some connection. Again, our paddy cultivation and all. This is not very large scale cultivations, or vast expanses are not, into paddy. It's small patches. Then there is some buffer. Then there is another patch of paddy. So I think the large scale monocultures are definitely detrimental.
Okay. Okay. Okay, thank you. That's completely fascinating, very interesting. I love that little mud bath scene that you showed. So thank you very, very much, Pooja. And yeah, thank you for that presentation. And it's also, so Deepti, may I just request you to sort of unmute and yeah, have the video
Yes,
on,
sir.
and you could share the presentation while I speak so
Yes,
that
sir.
you can get started after it. So Deepti is happens to be she's done her PhD in the area of riparian buffers, which is a part of the riparian ecosystem that is probably one of the least studied parts to date. And Deepti's done her doctoral dissertation on that. And if I'm not mistaken, she did it in the landscape of Kodagu, and she today is a guest faculty at Bangalore University. Uh, she is very passionate about the sort of biodiversity that she saw during the course of her work. So, Deepti, I'm going to hand it over to you and ask you to possibly take us through what you believe is the unseen face of the river. So, over to you, Deepti, and it's all yours.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. So, am I audible, sir?
Yes, you're audible and we can see the presentation. Please continue. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And hello, everyone. So, I will be presenting on the riparian buffers. So, when we say river, the very first thing that comes to our mind is water, yeah, particularly flowing water, and then other things like maybe fish or even water birds like ducks or egrets, and maybe even a bridge across the river, or even playing in river water, and so on. So one thing that we have all seen about the river but have hardly paid attention is the riparian buffer. So the riparian buffer, like how Pooja already mentioned, it is present along the river. But to be more precise, the riparian buffer is actually an interface between the land and the river. So here, if you can see, the blue part is the river, and we have the terrestrial surface, the land surface, and the dark green patch is actually the riparian zone. And so these riparian zones are linear patches of land, and globally, their width is as small as 1 meter to up to about like 100 meters. And here you can actually see a side view of the riparian zone. So here it is between the aquatic and the terrestrial ecosystem. And the riparian zone has a three-dimensional interaction to say. So that is, it interacts upwards into the canopy, and downwards into the groundwater, and laterally with the river system as well as the terrestrial system. So an important characteristic of the riparian zone is its vegetation. So this vegetation helps the riparian zone to perform many of its functions. So here we can see, like whenever there is, so the river is actually prone to annual flooding, and the vegetation, the roots of these trees help in stabilizing the river banks. They help in controlling the soil erosion, and also the leaves or fruits that fall off from the trees into the river support some of the invertebrates as well as the fishes in the river. And like we saw in the previous presentation, it is also a habitat for wildlife, and some birds use this riparian buffer for their breeding. And yeah, the vegetation also acts as a carbon sink. It helps in groundwater recharge and so on. So yeah, here you see that seafood, timber, water, or fuel wood. These are some of the services that we obtain from the natural systems. So the benefits that we obtain from the natural systems are termed as ecosystem services. So these ecosystem services are largely classified into 4 categories. So the products that we obtain, it could be fuel, fodder, timber, water, they are termed as provisioning services. And the next category is ecological processes that are taking place in the natural systems. Uh, from that, what benefit we are getting are known as the regulating services. So pollination or erosion control are all the ecological processes. So from pollination, we are able to get food crops, and from water infiltration, the groundwater recharge is taking place. And the next service is something that we can feel. It's non-material. We cannot get hold of it, like it's not a product. So such service is known as the cultural services. So these cultural services, example is a spiritual or a religious feeling and inspiration from nature to draw for art or music, etc. And in order to obtain all of these 3 services, there is another category of services which supports this, known as the supporting services. So, for example, with water recycling, only we are able to get fresh water, or our groundwater is recharging. And when photosynthesis occur, only then we are able to get, like plants are able to grow and we are able to get our food, etc. So different ecosystems like forest ecosystem or a desert ecosystem, river ecosystem, all of these ecosystems provide at least a few of these ecosystem services. Similarly, the riparian zone also provides some of these ecosystem services. So in my study, I studied what are some of these ecosystem services provided by the riparian zone of the river Kaveri. So River Kaveri, it originates in Kodagu district and flows within Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. So my study was within Karnataka. So in Karnataka, it flows for about 320-kilometer river stretch. And here, this is the flow of Kaveri in Karnataka. And these are some of my sampling points where I studied. And the riparian vegetation of Kaveri, some of its characteristics are in the upper stretch, that is in Kodagu district, the vegetation is largely evergreen, semi-evergreen and moist deciduous. And the middle and the lower stretch, that is from Mandya, Narsipura and up to Chamarajanagar, the vegetation is like dry deciduous and thorn scrub forest. And 177 tree species have been recorded in this riparian zone. It is also home for the grizzled giant squirrel, otters, and some species of owls. And so the carbon, so we all know that plants are able to absorb carbon and store it in their bodies. So this particular process is known as carbon stock. So I assessed how much of carbon is there in the vegetation, in this riparian vegetation, and I found that the carbon stock in this riparian vegetation was 317 tons per hectare. So this first picture is of Terminalia arjuna, the white bark tree. So this particular tree had the highest amount of carbon compared to all the other species. So here also, in the second picture, you can see stands of Terminalia arjuna, and the lower picture is of Maduka. So it is not just the forest ecosystem that is able to absorb carbon and store carbon and help in mitigating climate change. Even the riparian buffers have a potential role to mitigate climate change by acting as a carbon stock. So it's not just the vegetation, even the soil also absorbs carbon, even the litter absorbs carbon. So when we look at other features also, more amount of carbon stock can be found even in the riparian zones, just like other ecosystems. And the tall trees in the riparian zone are not only a habitat for birds like the hornbills, but they also support insects like the honeybees. So this is the colony of Apis dorsata, or the giant bee. So the tall trees provide habitat for this bee, and short trees and shrubs are a habitat for Apis mellifera, or the dwarf honeybee. And then the cavities of trees or cavities on the in the riparian buffer in the soil is a home for Apis serena, or the Asian honeybee. So when you zoom into this cavity, you can see these bees inside the cavity. So economically, how these bees are important to us is, in the upper stretches, a lot of coffee plantations are present along the riparian zone. So these coffee flowers, they bloom in summer, and when they bloom in summer, the plantation looks like this. And there are many number of flowers waiting to be pollinated, and more than 90% of the coffee flower pollinators is the Apis dorsata species. So Apis dorsata, so these flowers are largely pollinated by Apis serena, Apis dorsata, and then the Apis mellifera. And so in the colony count that I did in the riparian zone, I found that the Apis dorsata colonies were very high, like majority of them were Apis dorsata colonies, because there were tall trees to provide habitat for this. And the cavities, so Serena was only 6% and Floria was only 3%. So this is because they also nest even in the agricultural landscape. But for dorsata particularly, they need tall trees. And in my pollination study, I also found that these Apis dorsata, they visit the coffee flowers for pollination. So as the distance increased from the riparian zone into the coffee plantation, the number of visits by these bees reduced. So the plantations that are close to the riparian zone are like they are suitable for pollination from the Apis dorsata, like they are in advantage of being pollinated from the dorsata species. Yeah. And provisioning services, like I already mentioned, these are the products that we get from the ecosystems. So the local communities, they harvested fuel, fodder, honey, fruits, mushroom, bamboo, and leafy vegetables. So fuel wood was largely used for bathing, and fodder had like 3 advantages. One was the villages that didn't have a gomala or the community grazing land, they prefer to graze in the riparian zone. And second was, when there was no fodder available in the other parts of the landscape in summer, the riparian zone still had fodder and supported the the grazers. And another advantage is, if you take your cattle to the riparian zone, you get fodder as well as water for drinking and bathing of the cattle. So yeah, and the next is honey. So the honey was largely harvested by Soliga communities in the Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary. So these communities, they harvested honey mainly for market-based purpose. That is, it was their source of livelihood. And the other things like fruits, mushroom, bamboo, and leafy vegetables were harvested at a lower proportion. And all of these was for their subsistence. Only honey was a source of livelihood in this riparian zone, whereas rest of them were all used for for the subsistence. And yeah, so these are some of the cattle grazing along the riparian zone. Actually, towards the right side is the river bank, and this was in summer. And cultural services is actually the non-material benefits. It's only what we can feel. So there were several temples located along the river bank. So prominent ones like are the Somnathpura, Srirangpatna, Kapdi, Muttati are all located along the river bank. And apart from these prominent ones, even the villages had smaller temples along the river bank. And there were several places where this bull was present along the river bank, indicating sacredness towards to the riparian zone. And not just that, people also perform rituals in the riparian zone. So this picture is from Muttati, and it's not just temples that are located along the river bank. There are even cemeteries along the river bank. So the riparian buffers play, they have a significant religious role in the among the communities. And apart from this religious or spiritual value, the communities also prefer to recreate themselves in the riparian buffer. For example, in the upper stretch in Kodagu, the local communities, they prefer to go for a walk along the river bank that is in the riparian buffer. And for some of the respondents in summer, it was an advantage because they could see how much is the flow in the river. And in case the summer rains are delayed, they could irrigate their plantation to the river water. So going and accessing the riparian buffer for recreation varied among the communities. So higher preference was there in Kodagu, while in the lower stretches there was not much of a preference. And now we know that the riparian buffers are there, they are providing certain services. How are we treating these riparian buffers, or how are we taking care of them? Is so the riparian buffer, the trees that are present here are largely being cut down to expand the agricultural land. And this is sand mining in the upper stretches of the river. So when in summer, when the river flow, water flow reduces, so in that particular time, people extract sand from here. So when there is going to be no river, obviously there will be no riparian buffer. So the riparian buffer is always linked to the river. And these riparian buffers are not just religious spots, there are many recreation spots as well. So large waste dumping is huge in this particular patches. So it could be like ritualistic waste like flowers or turmeric, camphor to other like large plastic trash are found along these river banks. So why are we not taking care or treating these riparian zones badly is because one is they are poorly understood by the local communities as well as the visitors, the communities that are coming to visit these spots. And then they are badly managed is because there are no proper policies or guidelines to conserve these riparian zones. And you'll be surprised to know that there are only two, rather I will say one conservation reserve that is exclusively reserved for the conservation of the riparian buffers. That is the first one is the Shalmala Riparian Ecosystem Conservation Reserve across the Shalmala River. And to get this conservation reserve status, the local communities played a very important role, and that's how they were able to get it as a protected area. And the second one is the Tungabhadra Otter Reserve. So this is, yeah, I said only one conservation reserve is because the second one is specifically for otters. So we can just consider that when we are conserving otters, we are indirectly conserving even the riparian landscapes. And so the riparian buffers are ecotones because they are present between two different ecosystems, the land and the aquatic ecosystems. They are definitely providing a lot of services. They are providing the ecosystem services at multi-scale and at multi-dimension. However, they are under threat because of various anthropogenic activities. Since these riparian buffers are embedded in human systems, unlike a forest ecosystem or an ocean ecosystem, these are largely within the human landscapes. Hence, the role of communities is very important in conservation of these landscapes. And I acknowledge the Ruford Foundation for providing me grant to carry out this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepti. That was so interesting. Thank you very much. And I'll tell you the 2-3 things that immediately came to mind, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, in a way, summarizing. You've actually, when many of the talks that we have done, that we have had on the L-IFE channel, have focused really on conservation. You've really connected the economic aspect of conservation and you brought that into the picture. For example, talked about exactly why coffee planters should have a strong vested interest in protecting riparian buffers, because their coffee output is very strongly dependent on pollination that happens as a result of conservation of the buffer. I think that's a vital point that I had noted down as well. You've talked about livelihoods of the Sholigas, and these are economically often disadvantaged communities, and about the livelihoods from honey and subsistence food that they often collect in gathering from the forest. And I didn't know about the Shalmala Conservation Reserve. Thank you. That was very interesting as well. Right. So one question to you before we go ahead to Denson is, you spoke about sand and sand mining. Now, to my knowledge, these riparian buffers and sand actually are two sides of one coin, because when sand mining happens, doesn't it also loosen the soil and result in buffers toppling into the water? Trees, falling into the water in high rainfall days, or when the water is gushing down streams. Uh, doesn't that happen as well? Aren't they sort of very really two parts of one coin in some sense? And when you have an intact buffer, it also helps in sedimentation and enriching the sediment in the benthic zone. So your view on that, and then we move on.
Yes, sir, definitely. So if the sand mining definitely destroys the riparian vegetation, like you already mentioned, the trees and the vegetation can topple into the river. So the sand mining, I want to add that sand mining was done in the lower stretches of the river, like lower stretch like Mandya and Nasipura. So I was aware only of that. And during my field work, when I went to the upper stretches, I was surprised to know that it was being done even in the upper stretches. So that was in summer when the river flow was less. So they divert the river flow and remove sand from the center of the river. So like this, when they are loosening the soil, so the diversity within the river is also changing, and obviously the riparian vegetation like gradually will change, because riparian vegetation also starts when grasses, herbs, shrubs, and moves up to trees. So slowly there is a gradual toppling of the vegetation of into the riverbank.
Okay. Okay. One final question before we move ahead, and then we'll take questions from the audience after it's over, which is, in your work, have you come across any sacred groves along the Kaveri which are actually riparian buffers? Any sacred groves, and has the community treated them as sacred with due respect and so on?
Yes, sir. Actually, in Kodagu district, this place called Doddapulikote. So there is a lot of forest patch. So that actually adjoins, like it crosses across the river. So some part of that sacred grove is actually the riparian buffer. So in that Doddapulikote area, the forest is really conserved well, and they say that the like so yeah, I visited some coffee plantations there, and the bee colonies were also much higher along this riparian buffer. So I didn't get a chance to get into that sacred grove, but adjacent to the sacred grove, we did find a lot of this Apis dorsata colonies. So that indicates that the sacred groves are also being well maintained and conserved by the communities.
Community.
And there is also the older generation, they say that the younger generation is not much into conserving the sacred groves.
Okay. Okay. So clearly a call for action there, an agenda on the table. Okay.
Yes.
So Deepti, once again, thank you very much. That was
welcome.
a very nice presentation. Thank you very much. Right. And you can sort of stop sharing the screen while I very briefly introduce Denson, and then he can start sharing his screen as well. So two very enriching presentations. We've had Pooja speak about the Malabar pied hornbill and about hornbills in general, but specifically about the Malabar pied hornbill. And we've moved on to really looking at. Sorry, I'm just going to get that back. Yeah, we've also looked at Deepti speaking about riparian buffers, and we're now going to get Denson on board. So Denson works with the River Research Center as a project associate, and his passion is really looking at fish. He's worked on fish and on headwater assemblages of fish. And my first memory of Denson is when he and his colleague Bibin, we were working on otters, on small clawed otters together, and we parked the vehicle by the side of a hill and went down a grassy patch down to the river. And while we were right in the middle of walking down with grass coming up to my waist, Denson proudly announces that this is very strong king cobra country, right? And there are loads and loads of snakes and king cobras found here, which I can tell you didn't particularly get me seriously motivated at that moment, right? I was, but subsequently, of course, I was very, very thankful to him and Bivin for taking me through. So on that interesting note, Denson, you've done some very interesting and, if I may use the phrase, offbeat work. This is not
Thank you, sir. Thank you so
mainstream
much
work.
for that.
It's unusual work. It's hard work. You've done random sampling across streams and in headwaters. What we would really like to know, so please do start sharing your presentation.
Sure, sure, sir.
What we would really like to know from you is what you have seen about fish diversity and its connection with, stream ecosystems and riparian ecosystems. Any correlations between the destruction of riparian buffers and therefore destruction of fish diversity, that sort of correlation, right?
Sure,
So
sir. Sure.
that's really, so do start sharing your screen, and then there you are. I think that has started.
Okay. Yes.
And over to you, Denson. It's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Hi all, I'm Denson Drones. I'm a wildlife researcher based in Wayanad district of Kerala. Uh, so today I'm going to start with the influences of physical habitat and riparian zone integrity on freshwater fish assemblages, mostly from the Western Ghats. 1 minute, I think I have some problems with the slide share.
So far, so good, Denson. Don't worry. So far, so
Okay,
good.
okay. Okay, so I'll be talking on influences of physical habitat and riparian zone integrity on freshwater fish assemblages. So, as with most of us know, that a stream system, the biotic communities of a stream system is greatly dependent on the physical integrity of the streams. So, the physical integrity of streams are highly maintained by three major factors. The first one is substrates, as you can see here. The second one is stream type, and the third one is riparian zone. So the substrate is what we can find on the stream bed, and we can largely classify them into six major types based on the size. And the second one is stream type, which is greatly dependent on water depth and velocity, and the slope of the hill or slope of the land. And the third one is the riparian zone. So here I give few examples for different stream types, just to know how many different kind of habitats a single stream can hold on. So largely we can classify them into pools, rifles, cascades, or torrents, everything. Okay. And here, for some people who may not be familiar with the term stream order, I have a schematic representation here. So you can see numbers from represented in different colors. So number one indicates hill streams, which are originating from the hills. Uh, Smaller hill streams, which may join together to form larger streams. Number two, which again join together to form even larger streams. Number three, and two larger streams join together to form four. So accordingly, we give the orders, I mean, number for orders for the streams. I hope that you got it. And when we think about the riparian vegetation along stream stretches in the Western Ghats, it is really important to know that when we think about rivers, as Dipti ma'am said, everybody think that river is just a flowing water body. But in fact, river is not just a flowing body of water. Instead, it is a combination of several kind of habitats which host several kind of species and is very diverse in its own course. So when we look at this picture, here you can see a small hill stream running through the shola grasslands of Western Ghats. So these are the first points, I mean, starting points of most of the river systems in the Western Ghats are from the sholas. And here the riparian zone is not really categorized by a defined zone. When the water is flowing down in this picture, you can see the riparian zone is classified by the presence of short herbs, ferns, and everything. So when the elevation dips further down, the stream order get increased and the substrates become coarser, and accordingly the riparian vegetation also changes. Here you can see it is dominated by trees, ferns, palms, and everything. But in this picture, the stream is running through evergreen forest, and the riparian zone is actually continuous with the evergreen forest adjacent to it. When the river is flowing down to plains and plateaus, the riparian system gets well defined. So there are species which are adapted to live completely inundated or partially inundated for months, and it creates a separate kind of habitat which is different, which can be differentiated from the adjacent landscape as a whole. So my study is basically focused on identifying the diversity and distribution of freshwater fishes in the upper catchment region of Kabini River in Wayanad district. Many of you guys may know about Kabini, mostly because of the tigers and elephants, but here we are focusing on freshwater fishes. And the fish sampling was done from 2014 to 2020 for almost 6 years. And we have screened for more than 89 different stream stretches within the Kabini catchment, totaling for around 2,200 locations. And we have got some really fascinating results with this. We've got 136 fish species from the reach, which is the highest record for any studied rivers of Western Ghats. So we got two major correlating factors which actually determine the assemblages of stream fishes. And the first one is elevation and stream order. So here in this graph, you can see when the elevation is high, the stream order is low, and the number of species encountered is also low in here. When the elevation is low, the larger the stream order and higher number of species is there. So basic idea is when the stream order is increasing, when the river is becoming bigger, it hosts more number of species. So the second factor is riparian vegetation and how it is affecting the fish assemblages. The riparian vegetation is one key factor which affects the fish assemblages in Western Ghats, and I think in most of the streams all around the world. And it regularly in the Western Ghats, it is mostly influenced by several of the factors which is under control of the riparian vegetation. The first one is water temperature. So when the canopy is closed, the water temperature will definitely be lower, and several species of fishes are intolerant to high water temperature in the Western Ghats, especially the high lower order stream fishes. And then comes the light intensity. Of course, when the canopy is closed, the light intensity reaching the stream surface will be low, and several species are adapted to live in that condition. Also, as with many of the roles of riparian vegetation is already discussed by Deepti ma'am, but here we can say, I have to repeat the points like it holds the substrate in right place. So how it is important to fish, when the substrates are holded into right places, it provides different kind of habitats. And also it holds the sediments, it traps the sediments. And that is really important because the turbidity of the water and siltation is controlled by the riparian vegetation in that way. And it also regulates the water velocity to some extent. It dissipates the stream energy, and several kind of habitats are created within the same stretch. It also filters nutrients and pollutants from the water and make that clear. Here you can see a schematic diagram which is showing out nutrient cycling within a riparian zone. As we all know, riparian zones are interfaces between land and water. So how is this nutrient cycle determining the assemblage of fishes? Here, you can see many of the freshwater fishes in Western Ghats depends on allochthonous food sources, like those which originate from the land and which moves into the water. Here you can see, here you can see the leaves are falling into the water. Likewise, we get flowers, seeds, fruits, and everything falling into the water, and that can be directly fed by the fish, or the leaves which are going to the stream bed attracts a lot of macro invertebrates there, and the macro invertebrates are either directly taken by smaller fishes or taken by the insect larvae or larger invertebrates, which are taken by the fishes. And the fishes are again taken by larger fishes, which is again fed by the otters or bats or birds or many other kind of fauna. So it's kind of a cycle between nutrient flow between land and water. So the riparian vegetation is critical for this kind of uh, systems, and it definitely affects the assemblage of freshwater fishes in there. In addition, it also provides shelter in the form of overhanging vegetation, submerged root systems, woody debris, and a lot of other dead organic matters. It also provides spawning grounds for several of these endemic fishes. Many of the Western Ghats species of freshwater fishes depend on leaf litter as spawning grounds because when there is leaf litter, the young ones will have more food to feed on. So spawning grounds are there in the form of leaf litter, in the form of overhanging vegetation, and in the form of woody debris and everything. So, and it also provides corridors for the fishes to migrate from large channel rivers into smaller, lower order streams. Okay, so our study in Kabini supported this view, which I can represent with this graph. Uh, Here, the green color represents stream stretches which are having high riparian vegetation, and the brown color indicates stream stretches with the riparian vegetation removed. On the first glimpse, you can see that the number of, and the numbers here represent stream orders from 1 to 7. Okay, So from the first glimpse, you can actually see that the number of species is always higher in the higher order stream. So here Kabini mainstem is seventh order, and we're getting almost around 85 species of freshwater fishes from that reach. But when we compare within a stream, uh, when you compare two different stream stretches within a stream in the same order, you can see the number of species is always higher in stream stretches with high riparian vegetation, or and the number of, and that is common for all the stream orders here. You can see that. So this is further supporting this idea. And when we talk about the lower order streams, here we say up to the order 3, we say the number of species encountered is low, but the number of endemic species encountered is really high in these streams because many of the species in the Western Ghats are adapted to live in high torrential waters. And here are a few examples for that. On this side, you can see two different species of fishes, which are called the loaches belonging to family Balitoridae and Namaquilidae. I'm not using the scientific terms more. So here you can see the fins of this fish is adapted to that way. They act as like limbs. They act like limbs for vertebrates. Land vertebrates, where they cling on to rocks and they feed, and the mouth parts are adapted to feed on substrates, feed on food particles got trapped in substrates here. Similarly, this fish is also adapted in some way to live in the torrential waters. Here, there is another fish belonging to the family Sisoridae and belonging to genus Glyptothorax. They named Glyptothorax for a reason. Here you can see an apparatus, an adaptation. It is an adaptation where this organ actually acts as a suction pad or something which will make them attached to this rocks and other substrates so that they can feed on the stream bed even in high torrential waters. And on this side, we get another species which looks like any other normal fish, but the body is streamlined and they move really fast in torrential water. So they can jump over cascades and rifles, and they are well adapted for uh, life in higher order stream, lower order streams in high elevation. So these are few examples. There are so many other species who are adapted to live in high torrential streams, but I've taken a little more. So this is a typical ecosystem where these kind of species are found. Also, we could note that several of the threatened and endemic species, Kabini is actually tributary of Kaveri, and all of these species listed in this slide is actually endemic to the Kaveri river system. And all of these species could be recorded only from healthy river reaches, which are having highly intact riparian vegetation. And we were lucky to get the iconic humpback master in this. I hope Steve is listening to this. And we have got really, I was so happy to see this wonderful animals in Kuruvavatato River Delta of Kabini. So when we move on to the threats for the river, of course, there are so many anthropogenic disturbances to the river system, as with many other systems, sewage disposal, chemical fertilizers, substrate removal, mostly for sand mining. And sand mining is also impacting a lot on riparian vegetation removal. Also, Wayanad is one of the most important tourist area in Kerala. So we have a lot of resorts and cottages and everything booming up, and mostly in the same spot where the rivers originate, and that is affecting the river system really bad. Again, the pressure is put forward by climate change. For the last consecutive 3 years, we got floods, really bad floods, and for the past 5 years, we have got really bad summer. The drought conditions during that period was really high, and this further fragments the available population, available habitats for the fish, and many of the species are strictly kind of restricted to the riparian zones at once. And again, there is one bigger problem arising, which is almost always overlooked. There are so many disease outbreaks for fishes in the river system. We have got 3 consecutive years of outbreaks of fungal and bacterial diseases in the fishes, and they're taking off a large proportion of the fishes. And uh, and as with, I am saying that if you're trying to restore a riparian system, it is difficult than many other forests to be restored because it is constantly under pressure by floods, droughts, and everything. So proper researches have to be done because the riparian system along the same stream is changing on its course. So we have to do proper research on what kind of native fauna is found where, and similarly, other protection plan can be taken forward. So here in Kabini, we have one single space called the Kuruvavatato River Delta, which spans over 1,000 acres of land, where this river is splitting up into different distributaries, making so many islands. And this is the only reach in Kabini where we have a continuous stretch of riparian vegetation. And I put forward the idea that it is currently under the reserve forest category of Kerala Forest Department. And we are actually trying to elevate the protection level to a national park or a riverine sanctuary for the fishes, for the otters, for the crocodiles, and everything. Thanks for listening. Thank you so much.
Oh, that was really something. I mean, I think there's so many points you made, uh, but even before we look at that, Denson, the question to you is, given that um, you're dealing with something that also happens to be a protein source by and large for people, right? Not all the species,
Yes,
but
sir.
certainly some of these species, right? What is the role that people potentially have to play as communities in protecting either riparian stretches, which house some of these rare, endangered, threatened species, or in just the process of sensitivity and awareness that leads to that protection, right? Any
Okay.
thoughts from from your side on that
Yes, sir.
issue?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, like for instance, Wayanad is one of the most backward districts in India, and we have a lot of communities who are directly dependent on the riparians on for their survival in the form of several ways. Like many of these tribal communities are directly dependent on fishing, and it's one of their major source of income. And actually, I've told about Kurovata to River Delta. That river delta is made into a conservation reserve by not a conservation reserve it is really important for the Kurma community. So they have this belief that the gods are living there, so they protect the land and they give guardians to this land, and many of these people are employed in the forest department as guardians for this forest. So they know how important the landscape is for them and for the fish and all other species of animals inhabiting the area. Similarly, we can make other fishing communities in the region aware of the issue. And another major issue which I didn't mention here is actually the exotic species. Many of these exotic species, to increase the inland production of fish, many of these exotic fishes are introduced in here with the permission from the government. And that is adding pressure to our native fishes. And people often think that larger fishes mean more protein, more food, more money. And it's really hard for us to make people aware of this issue. We tried it a lot, and tribals who really know about the fishes know that their populations are going down, dwindling down. And many people in Wayanad believe that tilapia is native to our places because they see them as a major source of water, a source of food. What they've said, they are introduced by the Britishers, and many of these people have seen them from their childhood. So they think that exotic species are native to our places. So, uh, but again, there are so many other fishing communities who are willing to help us with the riparian stone restoration, and we have a small group called the riparian group. Actually, the idea is from you. I don't think that you remember that.
Okay.
So. We have a small group. We established a small nursery in Kuruva with the help of the forest department. And a main challenge with that is like restoration is always a solution for this, but it takes years to come up. So before that, we have to address many other issues like sand mining. The substrate is removed at a great rate in the reservoir, in the river, and we are losing fishes to that. Siltation is a very serious issue in Kabini. Many of the species, including the masters, won't breed where the water is silted. And again, sand mining is practiced even in the very low stream order stretches in the high altitude regions like Vaitiri or Lekidi and everywhere. So that have to be addressed. And
Right.
we had faced a lot of landslide issues here. And many of the landslide happened in stream stretches where the riparian vegetations are totally removed. So
Oh,
I think this is right time to act, and as a group we can do it together.
okay. Okay. Very important. Very important. Thank you. That was really quite spectacular, especially to see those different fish and some of the adaptations. That was simply brilliant, and good to have Sneha on. I'm going to hand it over to Sneha to potentially look at some of the questions and in turn allocate those questions to speakers. So thank you, Sneha, and over to you.
Yeah, so hi, Denson, Pooja, and Deepti. It was wonderful listening to you all. What a lovely session. And this topic is very interesting to me personally because riparian habitats are amazing for turtles as well. I work on turtles, and so let's jump to questions
Wow.
straight away. Desmond has a question where he says that in my native, I've noticed sewage being dumped into streams by the residents who live in close proximity. This is an easy way out to get rid of the sewage. Can anyone here suggest a viable solution to introduce to these residents on how they can manage sewage? So either of you can take this question. Maybe Deepti can,
Yeah, okay.
or
Yeah.
So yeah, the especially the villages who are right next to the river, they have this tendency to release their sewage into the river. But some villages which are away from the river in Karnataka, they practice this like having a pit. Um, so this pit will have stones and all. It's like a soak pit, and which will also recharge the groundwater. So maybe that kind of structures can be set up for individual household for their sewage. So this is only for like the kitchen and the bathroom wastewater.
right, right. So that is great, but I think the majority of issues, like I would also like to put, like when I was living in Telari, the stream flowed right behind my house, and we were all expected to dump all the waste into that stream.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think the major issue was of the solid waste of the plastic, and so I personally I would like to add here, Desmond, is that um, garbage waste collection, unless and until it is practiced, this is an issue with smaller villages where there is no waste collection system. And you can complain to panchayat, not complain, but suggest to panchayats, because they get funds for these kind of activities, and you can push the panchayat to implement this. I know this is an uphill battle because implementing a behavior change is hard and it takes time, but I personally I feel that that is one way out of this. Maybe Gopa sir and Steve can add if you have anything, and maybe Denson and Pooja can also chime in if you have any other suggestions.
Yeah, the only point I want to quickly make and then move on to the next question, which Steve has raised about indigenous communities. But before we come to that, Malhar, who made a presentation earlier on small claw otters, for example, is currently working, doing exactly what Sneha has suggested. So he's working along a stream which is smooth-coated otter habitat right now, and trying to work with the community to get the waste away from the river and see if it can be sent for some kind of semi-processing to the extent possible, but primarily to not dump it into the river. One final point before we move ahead, which is something that I learned a couple of years ago, which is another pretty noxious habit that people have is when they use pesticides, for example, in agricultural plantations, there are a number of instances that have been reported of pesticide vessels being washed in the water. So even though you're not actually, sometimes they are dumped in the stream, but sometimes even washing the pesticide vessel in water, for example, can decimate populations of fish and turtles, crabs, and so on and so forth, because you're basically poisoning the water, right? So awareness goes up to a limit, but clearly working with the panchayat and getting it ground up is I think, the way to go that Sneha mentioned. Yes.
And we have
And
one more.
if
Sorry, Steve. Just one
I was
question.
just going to mention very, very quickly, because this is a useful opportunity to say the next webinar that we'll be holding on the 19th of December will be the final one for the year. And I'll be talking to 5 different groups who are involved with river cleanup. So we'll be looking at the science of it as well as community action. And there are 2 ways of looking at what Des has mentioned, which one is actually enforcing laws, but then also there's the other idea of how do we create pride within a community for their own river. So that's the kind of thing we'll be looking at in our next webinar on the 19th of December on river cleanup.
That's great. And Dr. Parmesha has added one point that we can link, maybe we can link Narega scheme with local community to conserve riparian buffer because it's incentive based. Yeah, so that's one great suggestion.
Yeah. So
So
one,
let's move on.
sorry, Sneha, one
Yeah,
quick point
sure.
to respond to Dr. Parmesha. So it's a great idea, and it's something that everybody who's working on riparian ecosystem should seriously consider. What you must consider is that NREGA actually, as a part of the program, involves some asset creation. So cleanup alone doesn't classify as an NREGA activity, any kind of, and that's in a way very sad, isn't it? But if there is some construction, if there is you're doing some infrastructure, creating a pond, then it is NREGA activity. That's something that we have got clarified by at the highest levels in Karnataka, so we are quite sure of that. Over to you, Sneha. Thank you.
Yeah, so moving on, Steve has asked a question to Denson. In Wayanad, does Denson agree that local communities, especially the tribal villages, have preferred fishes for food? My understanding is that Steve's understanding is that they prefer and are equipped to catch smaller hill stream fishes rather than larger carps. So Denson, the question is to
Yeah,
you.
it's a nice question, Steve. So basically, what I have seen there is like the tribal communities take the smaller fishes for their own consumption, but for income they sell out the bigger fishes. So usually they catch all kind of fishes, but for their domestic users they use the smaller fishes and mollusks mostly. They're dependent mostly on the mollusks and crabs. So, but still, many of this, even the tribals, especially the youngsters, think that many of our exotic fishes are endemic to this region.
That is That's really sad. I hope that doesn't happen with the Reddit sliders after a few years. Um, so that is the end of the questions. There is some discussion going on regarding the solid waste and the Narega scheme in the chat box, and maybe others can chime in as well. But I have a question in general. Is riparian habitat is like an edge ecotone. So I wanted to know what is the impact of dams on such a habitat because it's a very fragile ecosystem and dams basically alter everything. So would any
Yeah,
of you from your studies be able to
yeah,
talk about it?
yeah. I
So,
was expecting this
so
question
sorry.
from you.
So before you, so
Yeah.
Mr. Farooq Mehtar, Farooq has also raised a very similar question. He's requested
Oh yes.
Densin to elaborate the effect of dams on fish diversity. Just adding to Sneha's comment. Yes.
Yeah, I just saw
Okay.
that. I just saw that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I can explain this on with the
Yeah,
context of
please let me.
Kabini. So in Kabini, we are having like five different major dam projects. So in Kerala, we have two and three in Karnataka. So what happens is like even in the upstream tributaries, we are having large dams, very huge dams, which are blocking the river. And apparently their substrate movement is completely blocked. So, and water reaching the lower grounds are getting lower, and that is definitely affecting the riparian zones as well as the fish diversity because the fish cannot migrate up. For many of these fishes are showing migrations for breeding. Like many of these fishes, they have lateral and I mean longitudinal migration. Like they move through the rivers and through the tributaries. So all these activities are blocked by dams at one pace. And again, another classical example for dams doing something good for the nature is actually Kabini Reservoir. So as we all know, Kabini Reservoir area is one of the most important wildlife tourist zone in India. So we get a lot of elephants, tigers, and leopards coming over there. So why that happens is like when the water levels in Kabini recedes during the summer, it leaves out a large and huge meadow. So most of these elephants are migrating towards this area where they get efficient supply of food and water all throughout the year. So that is one single area in India where we get the highest concentrations of elephants. So if the dam is breached down, I don't know what is going to happen with them. But again, the dam is definitely bad for the masses and other fishes because we in India we really don't have fish ladder systems in the dam, so they cannot really migrate. And again, The riparian zones in the reservoir area is totally destroyed to some extent. Like inundation, riparian zones are usually riparian plants are used to inundation for some months in a year, but total inundation may not be efficient
Right.
for these plants to survive. So that have distracted the original course of the river, but still, I don't know.
Right.
Like that is a question which I do have, like what to do with the elephants.
Right. And I think maybe,
Sneha, I just want to add one more thing. And
yeah,
so
yeah,
this is from the literature I read that over a period of time, the dams have their water, and upstream of the dam, newer riparian zones will be formed, is what I have read.
right, right.
Oh.
Okay. And Pooja, how is Pooja there? Um, Pooja, have you seen any impact on hornbills
Yes.
on dams, or are there any studies that show dams impacting the riparian bird community? Not exactly the waders or the ducks and all, but birds like hornbills, like who we don't usually associate with water or rivers. Have you seen any impacts, or do you know of any studies that show any impacts on such birds?
So I not direct impacts of dams on hornbills, I would say, and I think the impacts are low simply because hornbills are strong flyers. But that doesn't mean that it is any less stressful for them physiologically to cross the barrier and fetch the food if that's how the distribution of their resources is.
Right,
Um, and so from other studies where we are looking at, how the modified habitats have changed in their features and in their, capacity to support hornbills and how hornbills are responding to it. So definitely there is a decline in their numbers, decline in the diversity and abundances of food. So these are the resource these are the changes one could expect, but again I would be not sure to comment on this if the dam is in a protected area or well forested area, and how that would directly impact hornbills.
right.
Maybe that's
So like
something that
indirect
one need
impact.
to.
Right, right. So more like indirect. I can't hear her. Is anybody having same problem?
No, we can't hear Pooja.
Okay, Pooja, we can't hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay, okay.
No, I can't hear her. I can just see her lips moving.
Yes.
Pooja, we
Okay.
are not able to hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah. Now I think you're. I think I can hear you. Yeah,
Okay. So what we will do is, I think we will probably
yeah. Move
it's
to
going to
the
be a
next.
little bit of a challenge.
Are we moving to the next question, or do I need to repeat the previous?
No, that's fine. That's don't
Yeah,
worry. I mean, I think there's a little bit of a challenge there.
yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so I think it's been a marvelous session, and I just want to
Are we
formally.
moving to the next question, or do I need to repeat the previous?
No, we are actually closing the session, Pooja, because I think there were a couple of issues of connectivity, and we will take it to a closure. We've exceeded our time anyway. Um, so just wanted to go back and thank Pooja very much for that lovely presentation, Deepti, that was so useful and informative, and for that offbeat work that Denson has done, which I find even my interactions with Denson, I come away always enriched with so much knowledge. And these are all folks who are there on Facebook. You can get in touch with them for more questions if you have or wish to know more. Right? I'm also going to share just for a moment. So this is pretty much a thank you kind of slide. Um, and the next session, I'm going to share this briefly. The next session is on the 19th of December, where, as Steve mentioned, it's a special event to do with river cleanup, right? A minor correction, by the way, one of the speakers, Pooja, she was a student at NCBS, but she's currently associated with the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology in Hyderabad, right? Um, on that note, thank you very much, everyone. Sneha, if you have nothing more to add, we can call it a day. And I hope everyone found this talk useful. It will also be available on our live YouTube channel. Sneha, over to you if
Yes,
you have any
yes.
last comments.
Um, there are there is a discussion, like there has been a discussion in the chat box, and you all can continue this discussion on our Facebook group, Learn Indian Freshwater Ecosystems. All of you can join that group, and we can carry on this discussion. It's very interesting, and we hope to see you there. So I can stop the live